Get out. Take your junk and go. Out!
Please don't.
Leave!
You're carrying triplets.
He spent years calling her empty, blaming her for every disappointment in his life. When the mistress arrived, he didn't even hide it. He threw her bags into the street, told her she had nothing to offer, and announced he was moving on to a real woman. She left quietly, holding on to the secret she hadn't even fully processed herself. The doctor's words still echoing in her ears. You're carrying triplets. And just a few minutes later, while she sat alone trying to breathe through the shock, her phone buzzed. Congratulations, your $300 million contract has been approved. Meanwhile, he was celebrating an engagement built on lies until the truth knocked the breath out of him. The barren woman he discarded was now the mother of his only children and the owner of a fortune he would never touch. Hello, family. Welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. Emily hurried down the hallway, clutching her purse tight against her side as she tried to steady her breathing. Daniel hated when she was late. He said it embarrassed him, made him look like he couldn't manage his own household. She glanced at her phone. 23 missed calls, all from him. The restaurant doors came into view, and she quickened her pace. Her heels clicked louder than she wanted. It felt like walking toward punishment. Daniel was already outside, standing under the dim gold lights, arms crossed. The moment he saw her, his jaw tightened. Really, Emily? His voice carried across the walkway. Late again? She tried to soften her expression, even though her stomach knotted. Traffic? He stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening it. You know my mother's been waiting. You know what she already thinks of you. And this is what you do? Emily opened her mouth to explain again, but he cut her off with a tired sigh and a quiet laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I swear, sometimes I think your empty womb isn't even the biggest disappointment in this marriage. She flinched. It was small, but it happened, and Daniel noticed. His expression hardened, as if her hurt annoyed him more than anything else. Let's go, he muttered. Inside, the restaurant was warm, full of soft chatter and clinking glasses. A place meant to feel safe. It never did, not for her. Margaret Carter sat at the long table, posture straight, pearls shining sharply against her navy dress. She didn't hide the way she looked Emily over, from her slightly wrinkled blouse to the faint flush on her cheeks. You finally made it, Margaret said, smiling without warmth. We were beginning to think something happened. Daniel slid into the seat beside his mother. Emily sat across from them, hands folded tight in her lap. So, Emily, Margaret began, the moment menus were set down, how are things going on your end? Anything new? Emily knew what she meant. Margaret always found a way to circle back to the same topic. We're doing fine, Emily said carefully. Work has been demanding, but I meant family, Margaret pressed, eyes almost soft but not quite. Any updates regarding future heirs? Daniel didn't look up from the menu. He didn't defend her. He never did. Emily swallowed. Nothing new. Margaret sighed like she'd heard that answer too many times. At your age, waiting becomes risky. Women are born with a certain amount of time. You don't want to look back one day and regret it. Daniel let out a quiet laugh. Maybe Emily just wasn't built for motherhood. Margaret covered her smile with her wineglass. Emily kept her face still, though something inside her cracked. She nodded politely, the way she always did, and pretended the tightness in her chest wasn't screaming. Dinner dragged on, every question Margaret asked turning into a reminder of what Emily hadn't given them, at least in their eyes. Dessert menus came and went. Daniel paid the bill without looking at her. Margaret kissed his cheek before leaving and gave Emily a stiff smile that said nothing would ever be enough. When they got home, Daniel went upstairs first. She followed quietly, trying not to replay the evening in her head. She tried not to think about the way Margaret's voice dripped with judgment, or how Daniel didn't defend her once. While Daniel showered, Emily gathered the laundry in their bedroom. Something to do with her hands, something to keep the thoughts away. She reached into the pocket of Daniel's blazer and felt paper. She pulled it out without really looking. Then she froze. A hotel receipt, one she had never seen before, one he had never mentioned. The room tilted for a moment. She breathed through it, forced herself not to assume, not to panic. She folded the laundry slowly, but the receipt lay on the bed, loud and glaring and undeniable. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, towel around his shoulders, she held it up silently. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. "What are you doing going through my pockets?" when he snapped. "I was doing the laundry," she said, voice soft. "Sure you were," he scoffed. "You don't trust me now, huh? That what this is? More paranoia?" "Daniel, I just asked where it came from. It came from a business dinner." "God, Emily, you always do this. Create problems where there aren't any." He grabbed the receipt from her hand. "You know what? I'm done arguing. I'm going out." He grabbed his keys. She reached for his arm. "It's late. Can't we just—" "Stop controlling me," he snapped, shaking her off. The door slammed so hard the wall shook. He didn't come home that night. Emily lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. At 3:12 a.m., she stopped checking the clock. At 5:40, she finally slept for a half hour, just enough to wake up feeling even worse. By the next morning, she forced herself to go to work. A routine was safer than sitting in the silence of their house. On her lunch break, she stepped into a cafe for a tea she didn't actually want. She stood in line, staring blankly at the menu, when she heard a voice behind her. "Emily, oh my God, what a surprise." Vanessa Hale, pretty smile, easy charm, but her eyes held something sharp, something hungry. Emily had always felt it, but never had proof. Emily forced a polite smile. "Vanessa, hello." "You look tired," Vanessa said sweetly. "Is everything okay at home?" Emily stiffened. "Everything's fine." "Good," Vanessa said, placing a hand on her arm for a second too long. "Daniel deserves peace. He works so hard, poor thing." Emily felt something cold settle under her ribs. When Vanessa got her coffee, she chatted about nothing. Weather, traffic, a new yoga class she swore by. Emily nodded through all of it, wishing she could disappear. At the door, Vanessa paused. "You're such a strong woman, Emily. Truly." She smiled again, a little too wide. "Not everyone could handle everything you handle." And with that, she left. Emily exhaled shakily and picked up her cup. And that's when she saw it on the table. A hotel key card. Vanessa's name was written on the sleeve in neat, looping handwriting. For a long moment, Emily didn't move. She stared at the card until her vision blurred. Her hands went cold. She didn't remember paying for the tea. She didn't remember walking out. She only remembered the moment she got into her car and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her for years. She drove home on autopilot. Daniel's car was in the driveway. Her pulse picked up. She stepped inside quietly, bracing herself. Daniel stood in the kitchen, tie loosened, drink in hand. He didn't look surprised to see her early. He didn't look guilty either. "So," he took a slow sip. "You ran into Vanessa." Emily set her purse down. "She dropped this." She placed the key card on the counter between them. Daniel looked at it, then at her, and didn't even blink. "So what?" Emily felt her chest tighten. "Daniel, are you—" "Yes," he said plainly. "I am." The floor seemed to tilt again. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Daniel set his glass down, almost bored. "She makes me feel alive. She makes me feel like a man, Emily. Something you never could." She stared at him, the words hitting like punches she couldn't block. He continued almost casually. "And honestly, I'm tired of pretending. You bring nothing to this marriage. Nothing. I swear sometimes I think you're cursed." Emily swallowed hard. "Daniel, please don't—" "No." He pushed away from the counter. "We're done." Before she could respond, he walked past her, went upstairs, and came back down with her suitcases. He tossed them onto the porch as if they weighed nothing. "You offer me nothing," he said again, voice steady. "You can't even give me a child." Emily felt her legs weaken, but she held herself together. Barely. She picked up her purse, stepped over her own luggage, and walked away without a word. The motel room she checked into that night smelled of old carpet and stale air, but it was quiet, too quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, trying to breathe through the numbness. She pressed a hand to her stomach as a strange, sharp ache rippled through her. She hadn't told Daniel where she had gone that morning after the cafe. She hadn't planned to, but the doctor's voice still echoed clearly in her mind, steady and calm and unbelievable. "Emily, you're pregnant, with triplets." She had nodded slowly, unable to process any of it. Now she sat there, hands shaking, trying to absorb the truth of it while her world crumbled piece by piece. Emily sat on the edge of the motel bed, the thin blanket gathered around her shoulders as she tried to understand the day she just lived. The room was small and quiet, the kind of quiet that made her aware of her own breathing. She didn't turn on the TV or the radio. She didn't open her suitcase. She just sat there, hands resting in her lap, staring at nothing. Her mind kept drifting back to the doctor's office earlier that morning. She had gone in expecting the same disappointment she'd grown used to. She had practiced the polite smile she usually gave when the doctor said there was no change. But instead, she remembered the doctor's voice softening, the way he sat down across from her as if he needed her full attention. "Emily," he had said, "you're pregnant." Her heart had stopped for a moment. She remembered blinking at him, unsure she heard correctly. He continued gently, "You're carrying triplets." Triplets. The word had echoed in her head all day. Still did. She pressed a hand against her stomach now, feeling nothing yet, but knowing everything had changed. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, 3 children growing quietly while Daniel spent years calling her empty. She closed her eyes and inhaled shakily. The timing felt unreal, cruel almost. The same day she was thrown out of her home, she learned she wasn't empty at all. The same day Daniel told her she had nothing to offer, she learned she was carrying the very thing he claimed she could never give him. A laugh escaped her, small and tired. It wasn't from humor, it was disbelief, shock, a piece of her trying to breathe through something too big to understand. Her phone buzzed beside her. She jumped a little, startled by the sudden sound. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before opening the message, expecting maybe a work reminder or a delayed email. But when she read the text, her breath caught for the second time that day. "Congratulations, your $300 million contract has been approved." The words blurred before coming back into focus. She read them again, and again. It didn't feel real. She had spent months preparing that proposal. She'd worked nights Daniel mocked her for, meetings he said were pointless, a dream he claimed was too big for her to carry. But she had done it, quietly, carefully, using her maiden name so Daniel couldn't interfere. And now it was approved. 300 triplets, a marriage in ruins. Emily set the phone down slowly, feeling everything hit her at once. Her throat tightened and her chest ached. She had never felt so lost and so overwhelmed in the same breath. She had never felt so broken and so powerful at the same time. The room stayed silent. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, steadying her breathing. She looked around the small space again, the peeling paint, the shaking air conditioner, the worn-out carpet. It wasn't home, but maybe for tonight it was a start. A place where she could think without being attacked, a place where she could breathe. She leaned back against the headboard, staring up at the ceiling. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would look like. She wasn't sure how to face the world carrying 3 children and the weight of a contract big enough to change her entire life. She didn't know where she would go or who she could trust, but she knew one thing. $1 million. She wasn't, and she wasn't as powerless as Daniel believed. Her voice came out soft, almost a whisper, but steady. "He thinks he won." And that was where the night ended. Empty. Done. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give a future to children and women who have been abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing and turning on your notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Also, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and how did this story speak to you? Emily woke up the next morning in the motel room with the faint ache of reality pressing against her ribs. For a moment, she hoped yesterday had been a nightmare, something she could shake off by blinking a few times. But the dull hum of the air conditioner, the stiffness in her neck, and the heaviness behind her eyes made it clear everything had happened. Daniel's words, her suitcases on the porch, the doctor's voice, the contract approval, all real. She sat up slowly, hand drifting to her stomach without thinking. She didn't feel anything yet, no movement or fluttering, but she knew what was happening there. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, 3 secrets she wasn't ready to share. Her phone buzzed before she could gather herself. She glanced at the screen. Michael. She let it ring out. He didn't need to know anything. No one did. Emily showered, dressed in one of the plain blouses she packed, and drove to her office with the goal of keeping her head down. She arrived earlier than usual, hoping to slip into her workstation without running into anyone. Her reflection in the elevator doors looked worn out, but she straightened her posture anyway. She had a company to protect now. She had a contract worth $300 million under her maiden name. She had children to think about. Every step had to be careful. When she got into her office, she closed the door quietly and sat at her desk. The contract documents were already in her inbox. She scrolled through them with trembling hands, checking every clause, every signature line. It was real, locked in, final. Her name at the bottom looked different now, familiar but stronger. Emily Parker. Not Carter, not his anymore. She signed the final confirmation and exhaled. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. She felt protected. That was enough for now. She closed the laptop and rested her forehead on her folded arms. She couldn't cry here, couldn't collapse here. She just needed 5 minutes of quiet. Her babies were depending on her staying calm, staying whole, staying steady. She inhaled slowly, held it, and let it out until her pulse eased. When she finally stood to leave her office, she saw a few coworkers glancing her way. Some smiled awkwardly, some avoided her altogether. She could tell gossip had started. It always spread fast in their circles. Someone must have seen Daniel with Vanessa recently. Someone must have mentioned the separation. She felt eyes follow her down the hallway but kept walking. In the afternoon, she drove to her sister's office to submit the contract copies. No one questioned the use of her maiden name. No one asked where Daniel was. Everything stayed smooth, normal, professional. That was the point. She went back to the motel before sunset, pulled the curtains closed, and lay down with one hand on her stomach, whispering, "I'm here. I'm trying." The next morning, the world changed again. Daniel and Vanessa flooded social media, photos, videos, dinner parties, matching outfits, kisses captured on expensive patios and balconies, captions with inside jokes and hearts. Margaret smiling at Vanessa like she had finally gotten the daughter-in-law she deserved. Emily scrolled through it all in silence, her face still and cold. Comments filled the posts. "She's so Daniel. Emily looks never fit much happy into his better for world for him." Once. Anyway. Upgrade. Emily locked her phone. Her chest tightened, but she didn't cry. There was nothing left to break open. Later that day, she stopped by her office to check on final contract arrangements. A coworker pulled her aside discreetly, speaking in a hushed tone, as if sharing a secret she had no right to know. "Look, I don't know if you want to hear this," the coworker said nervously, "but I think you should. Daniel and Vanessa have been close for a long time, longer than anyone realized. Some of us thought you knew." Emily stared at her, throat tightening. "How long?" "Since before Christmas," she whispered. "Maybe longer. Vanessa used to say Daniel should be with someone who matched his ambition. I guess this was the plan." Emily nodded weakly, thanked her, and walked away. Her hands shook so badly she had to grip the railing near the stairwell just to steady herself. They planned it. They waited for her to fall apart. They wanted her to crumble financially and emotionally, so she would have nothing to fight back with. Her vision blurred. She blinked fast, forcing the tears back. She didn't have time to fall apart here. She left work early, drove back to the motel, and collapsed on the bathroom floor the moment she locked the door behind her. Her sobs came in heaving waves. She pressed her forehead to the cold tiles and tried to stop shaking. Her chest felt tight. Her throat hurt. Her stomach churned from stress and pregnancy nausea mixing into one unbearable storm. "What did I ever do to deserve this?" she whispered into the empty space. No one answered. No one could. Her whole body trembled as she cried, until suddenly she felt a small flutter deep inside her, almost like a soft tap, then another. She froze, breath caught halfway in her lungs. She pressed both hands against her stomach. The babies. The babies were moving. Something in her shifted. Not joy, not peace. Something stronger, heavier. Resolve. As if those tiny flutters were three small hands grabbing onto her from the inside, refusing to let her fall apart. She wiped her face and whispered, "Okay, I hear you. I'm not giving up." She stood slowly, bracing herself against the counter. Her eyes were red, but her chin lifted. She was tired, but something inside her had changed. The next morning, she walked into her company headquarters with steady steps, her shoulders squared. She had a meeting with Pharaoh. She had was 300 pregnant million, with his dollars only backing her. Children. And Daniel didn't know a thing. When she entered the boardroom, the members looked up. Some nodded politely. Some looked unsure. Some whispered behind their hands. Emily sat down, placed her files on the table, and spoke clearly. "I'm here to discuss the new contract." For the next hour, she held her ground. She explained the terms. She clarified the projections. She answered questions with calm precision. A few members tried to corner her, pushing back with doubts. She stayed steady. By the end of the meeting, the room had shifted. She could see it in their expressions. She wasn't the timid partner who lived in Daniel's shadow anymore. She wasn't the woman losing her home and her marriage and her dignity. She was the woman who had secured a $300 million deal on her own merit and didn't owe Daniel a penny of it. As she left the boardroom, one of the senior members approached her quietly. "Emily, whatever noise is happening outside these walls, you've proven you can handle things inside them." She nodded, offering a small smile before walking out. Later that evening, she sat alone in her motel room again, staring at her phone as yet another post about Daniel and Vanessa spread online. Pictures from a charity event, their hands intertwined, Vanessa leaning into him like she had known him forever. Margaret smiling behind them like a queen. Then came the news. Daniel was throwing an engagement party. Not someday. Soon. This week. And her name wasn't mentioned once. She didn't cry. Not this time. She just felt something inside her tighten, almost like her heart folding in on itself. She pressed a palm to her stomach, steadying her breath. Her babies were quiet now. Maybe sleeping, maybe listening. She whispered, "We're going to get through this." Her phone buzzed again. A notification from a news page. Photos from the party planning committee. Vanessa trying on dresses. Daniel looking at rings. Margaret giving a speech about new beginnings. Emily sat back on the bed, her pulse uneven. Emily didn't plan to check the engagement party updates again, but the posts kept spreading. By the end of the week, every social circle she knew had shared something about it. Photos of flowers being delivered. A designer posting Vanessa's fittings. Margaret smiling proudly next to a caterer, praising the future Mrs. Carter's exquisite taste. Emily turned her phone face down and closed her eyes. She tried to focus on breathing, slow and steady. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself she didn't need to look. But the ache was still real, sitting deep in her chest. On Saturday night, the engagement party happened. She didn't go. She didn't want to see it. But the updates found her anyway. People texted her without thinking. "Did you?" He moved on. "No, fast, Emily. She seems intense. I don't know how to feel about her." Are you engaged, okay?" Emily silenced her phone. When the first pictures came out, she forced herself not to look. But once the images appeared everywhere, on feeds, timelines, news blurbs, she stopped resisting. Part of her needed to see it with her own eyes, needed to see what she had been replaced with. Vanessa stood in a shimmering dress, smiling as if she owned the world. Daniel stood beside her, chest puffed, grin wide, his arm locked proudly around her waist. Margaret stood behind them, beaming. The caption under the photo read, "A perfect match." Emily stared at it for a long moment, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. She whispered, "Perfect for each other," though her voice cracked on the last word. Later that night, while she tried to eat something small for the baby's sake, a voice note came in from a friend who didn't realize how deep the wound ran. "You won't believe what Vanessa just said at the party," the friend whispered breathlessly. "She stood on the stage and told everyone she's ready to give Daniel everything he deserves. Like, everything. People were clapping. He looked so proud." Emily set the phone down gently before her hands could shake. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want any more reminders that Daniel had thrown her aside like nothing. She walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face until the sting pulled her back into herself. "Just breathe," she whispered, her fingers trembling against the sink. She went to bed early, curling on her side, arms around her stomach. "I'm here," she whispered to her babies. "I promise I'm here." That was all she could offer. The next morning, she sat on the motel bed with a cup of tea, trying to gather her thoughts. She forced herself to go through her emails, double-checking contract details and reading through follow-ups. The deal was moving forward smoothly. No obstacles, no problems, no threats from Daniel's side because he still didn't know it existed. Her life was still chaos, but at least one thing was safe. Sometime in the early afternoon, she got a call from a mutual friend. Emily didn't answer, but she listened to the voicemail later. The friend whispered, "The party was weird. I don't know how to explain it. Vanessa was acting different, nervous kind of. She kept pulling Daniel aside and whispering to him. At one point, he stiffened and left the room for a while. People noticed. Something is going on." Emily replayed the message twice, brows drawn together. She didn't know what Vanessa could be whispering about, and honestly, she didn't care. Their secrets weren't hers to worry about anymore. She put the phone down and took a breath. By late afternoon, another wave of photos from the party landed online. Emily scrolled past most of them, numb to the images of Daniel smiling with Vanessa pressed to his side. But one picture stopped her. It showed Vanessa leaning in close to Daniel, lips at his ear. He wasn't even looking at smiling. His shoulders were stiff, his eyes narrowed slightly, and his hand had fallen away from her waist. Anyone could see it. Emily stared at the picture, not out of curiosity, but because it felt strange to see him unsettled. Daniel rarely showed discomfort in public. Maybe Vanessa had said something petty. Maybe she'd brought up Emily's name. Maybe she was starting to show him who she truly was. Emily forced herself to put the phone down. Whatever happened at that party wasn't her concern. Wrong there. But the next morning, everything shifted. She was brushing her hair in the motel bathroom when her phone began to ring. She glanced at the screen and froze. Daniel. Her stomach tightened. She let it ring until it stopped. A moment later, it rang again. Same name, same number. Persistent, sharp, unwanted. She walked to the bed and sat down, staring at the phone as it vibrated on the blanket. He never called unless it was something for him. He never reached out unless he thought he could benefit. After throwing her out, after flaunting his new fiancée, after humiliating her in front of his family, why was he calling her now? The phone, 5 seconds. Then it started again. Daniel Carter. Calling his empty wife. Calling the woman he discarded. Calling the woman he believed had nothing to offer. Emily let it vibrate without touching it. She didn't. She didn't know what stopped ringing. Past. Vanessa whispered, "Know why he looks stiff." She didn't know what fear or paranoia had gotten into him, but she knew one thing. She wasn't answering. Into him. That photo. Emily ignored the ringing phone until it finally fell silent. When she checked the screen later, she saw 7 missed calls from Daniel, followed by 3 texts that looked almost friendly. "Hey, please call me back." She stared at the messages without blinking. Concern. He was pretending concern. After everything he had said, after throwing her out like she was disposable, after parading Vanessa like a prize. She blocked the number. For a few hours, that seemed to be enough. She sat at her desk, working through contract emails, trying to ground herself in something predictable. But around lunchtime, she got up to stretch and saw a familiar car parked across the street through her office window. Daniel. Her stomach dropped. She stepped back from the window, pulse rising. Her phone buzzed again. but this time from an unknown number. Pick up. I know you see me. Emily locked the phone and placed it face down on her desk. She felt the baby's stir inside her, a faint flutter that made her grip the side of her chair. Her breathing grew tight. She stayed inside the office for the rest of the day, waiting until the hallway lights dimmed before she left. When she finally stepped outside, Daniel's car was gone, but she still scanned the street twice before getting into her own. The next morning, when she arrived at work, she saw him again, leaning casually against his car, pretending not to look for her. When she walked past, her eyes focused straight ahead. He spoke in a soft, practiced tone. "Emily, you look tired." To check on talk? You. She kept walking. "Come on," he said, falling into step beside her. "I just want to talk. You disappeared on me. That's not like you." She stopped, turned, and met his eyes for the first time in days. "Daniel, we have nothing to talk about." "Yes, we do," he said, dropping the warmth. "You didn't have to run off like that. I was worried." "You weren't worried," she said quietly. "You were embarrassed." He opened his mouth, but she walked away before he could argue. She heard him call her name once, annoyed, but she didn't look back. Inside the building, her hands trembled as she pressed the elevator button. She couldn't let him get close. Not now. Not with everything she was protecting. Over the next 3 days, he appeared near her office twice more. Once sitting in the building lobby pretending to check emails. Once waiting in the parking lot leaning against his car, sunglasses on. She blocked 2 more numbers. He kept texting from new ones. By the end of the week, Emily moved from ignoring him to avoiding windows altogether. Around this time, the attacks began. It started small. A coworker gave her a strange look in the hallway. 2 others whispered when she passed, lowering their voices too late for her not to notice. Then came the first email from a partner on the new contract, politely asking if she was doing well and whether she needed additional time to focus on her health. The wording was too polished, too careful. It wasn't concern. It was fear disguised as kindness. Emily then frowned. Then another. By noon, she overheard someone in the break room mutter, "She's not stable right now." "That's what I heard." She froze. Margaret and it had to be them. On Thursday afternoon, a board member walked into her office without knocking. He looked uncomfortable, but not enough to hide his intentions. "Emily, we're hearing things," he said, "about your mental state, stress, unpredictability. Some people are questioning if you're maintaining control of the company during a delicate time." Emily felt heat rush to her face. Delicate time? "I'm not saying I believe the rumors," he continued, choosing every word like stepping around landmines. "I just want you aware. It might be wise to take a step back and let someone else handle the contract integration until things settle." She stared at him. "Until what settles?" He hesitated. "Your emotional health?" Emily gripped the edge of her desk. "Who's spreading this?" He lifted his hands. "I'm not pointing fingers, but Daniel's family is influential. Influential, controlling, vicious." She waited until he left before letting herself crumble back into her chair. Her throat tightened, and she pressed a hand to her stomach, rubbing slow circles to steady herself. It got her another screen. Email. "Vanessa," she whispered. "I'm fine. I promise I'm fine." But the pressure was building fast. By the next board meeting, Margaret's and Vanessa's rumors had done their damage. One board member, someone she trusted for years, announced he would be stepping back from supporting her current projects. "Just until things are stable," he insisted. Emily nodded numbly, even though the ground beneath her felt like it was shifting. Every decision she made now seemed to come with a shadow behind it. And then Michael walked into her office. He closed the door softly, as if he already knew too much. "Emily, can we talk?" She expected another question about the contract, another concern about rumors, another discussion about Daniel. But instead, he stepped closer, eyes soft in a way she didn't want to see right now. "I've been watching you try to hold everything together," he said. "I hate how they're treating you, and I hate how he treated you. You deserve better." Emily sank back in her chair. "Michael, not now." "Why not now?" he asked gently. "I'm trying to tell you something important." She looked away, heart sinking. She knew where this was going before he said it. I care about you, he said quietly. More than I should. More than just a colleague. Emily closed her eyes. Michael, please. I thought maybe, he continued, voice hopeful, with everything ending between you and Daniel. Maybe we could... No, she said, stronger than she expected. No, Michael, I'm not... I can't... There's too much happening. He stepped back as if she'd shoved him. His expression shifted from warmth to something wounded. I'm offering support, he snapped softly. And you won't even let me finish? It's not about support, she said. It's not about anything. I can't do this. Please understand. Instead of understanding, he stiffened. His pride bristled. Fine. Forget I said anything. He walked out without another word. 2 days later, at a crucial board vote, he was the one who turned against her, choosing to side with a member influenced by Daniel's circle. Emily watched his hand go up in the oppose column and felt something inside her drop, like the last support beam snapping in a collapsing house. After the meeting, she stepped into the hallway, the air suddenly too thin. That night she collapsed. It happened in the motel bathroom. 1 minute she was brushing her teeth, and the next her vision blurred. A sharp pulse hit her stomach, and she felt her knees give way. She grabbed the counter, but her hands slipped. The floor rose to meet her too fast. She woke up to bright lights and a sharp smell of antiseptic. A doctor stood over her, reading a chart. You fainted from stress, he said gently. You're carrying 3 babies. Your body can't keep absorbing this amount of pressure. Emily let out a weak, humorless laugh. What isn't high risk in my life right now? The doctor didn't smile. You need rest and less stress. The babies are safe for now, but that won't last if this continues. Emily nodded slowly. She touched her stomach again, and relief washed through her, sharp and desperate. They were safe, but she wasn't sure how long she could keep them that way. Emily was released from the hospital the next morning with strict instructions to rest, avoid stress, and follow up weekly. She nodded through the doctor's explanation, even though the word rest barely meant anything to her now. Rest didn't exist in her life, not with Daniel circling her like a shadow she couldn't outrun, not with the board fracturing, not with Margaret and Vanessa poisoning her reputation, not with 3 babies relying on her to keep them safe. Back at the motel, she sat on the edge of the bed and held her stomach with both hands. The silence felt heavier than before. She could still feel the cold floor from her collapse. She could still hear the doctor's warning in her head. Stress will harm the babies. She swallowed hard and closed her eyes. I'm trying, she whispered. I'm trying so hard. Her phone buzzed. For a moment she froze, afraid it was Daniel again. But it wasn't. It was her private investigator, the one she had hired quietly weeks ago, when she first sensed things weren't right with Vanessa. The message was simple. I have what you asked for. Emily's pulse quickened. She typed back, come to the motel, back entrance. 20 minutes later, a knock came, soft, intentional. She opened the door to find the investigator holding a file thick enough to make her stomach tighten again. They stepped inside. He closed the door behind him and spoke in a low voice. I found everything, he said, and you need to hear it. Emily sat down slowly, bracing herself. He opened the file and handed her the first document. This is Vanessa's medical record, he said. She cannot have children. She has known this for years. Emily blinked, absorbing the words. What Daniel wanted more than anything, an heir, Vanessa could never give him. Vanessa had lied, for years probably. Her stomach twisted. The investigator continued, placing another document on her lap. She targeted Daniel for his connections. She planned this. She studied his weaknesses. She used what he wanted most to pull him in. Emily felt her throat tighten as she read the notes, the screenshots, the emails. It was all intentional, calculated, cold. And this, he said, placing the last few papers in front of her, is the part you need to understand most. Margaret knew. She supported it. Emily looked up sharply. She promised Vanessa status, connections, and influence if she got you out of the picture. She believed you were holding Daniel back, so she found someone she thought could replace you. Emily stared at the papers, feeling each sentence hit like a stone dropping into water. Vanessa had never loved Daniel. Margaret had never loved Emily. And Daniel had never cared enough to see any of it. The investigator straightened. "I'm sorry, I know this is a lot, but you deserve to know the truth." Emily nodded, though her chest felt crushed. "Thank you," she whispered. When he left, she sat alone in the quiet room, staring at the stack of truth sitting on the bed beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just breathed, shallow at first, then deeper, until her vision cleared enough to focus. Late that night, she curled on her side, arms wrapped around her stomach. Tears finally came, silent and slow. She cried for the marriage she fought for alone, for the man who threw her away, for the family that never saw her as enough, for the betrayal she never deserved, and for the 3 tiny lives she had to protect in a world that suddenly felt hostile. She whispered to her belly, voice breaking, "I won't let them take you from me." She stayed like that for a long time, holding herself together because there was no one else left to do it. The next morning she woke up to a loud knock on her door, not pounding, but official, sharp. She pulled the robe around her and opened it only a crack. A courier stood outside holding a sealed envelope. Delivery for Emily Parker. She signed quietly and shut the door before opening it. Inside was a legal notice. The moment she unfolded the first page, her breath froze. Daniel Carter is filing for financial control based on marital abandonment. She sat down slowly, reading each line as if her eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. He was claiming she had left him without explanation. He was requesting access to her assets. He was trying to take everything from her. Again. Her hands shook as she turned to the next page. Respondent must disclose current pregnancy status. Her pulse skipped. He didn't. He was doing this blindly, thinking she had nothing left. No. Suspect. Emily stared at the page as anger and clarity tightened inside her chest. Not wild anger, not frantic anger. Something cooler, sharper, something steady enough to stand on. Her lawyer arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a single trembling phone call. She handed him the papers. He read them, eyebrows lifting slowly. Then he smirked. "He has no idea what he's walking into. We'll answer them." Emily looked up. "How?" "In public," he said. A calmness settled over her, cold but clean. She closed the folder with both hands and whispered, "It ends now." Emily walked through the courthouse doors with her lawyer beside her, her steps steady, her shoulders straight. The hallway buzzed with whispers and camera clicks, but she didn't look at anyone. She focused on her breathing, one slow inhale, one slow exhale. Her lawyer, Evan Cole, kept pace with her, carrying a heavy briefcase filled with the documents that would end everything. "Stay calm," Evan murmured. "Let him think you're scared." "I'm not scared," Emily said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but let him believe it. It'll make the impact sharper." She nodded once. Months of humiliation, betrayal, attacks, and fear had built up to this single morning. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for 3 small lives growing inside her. 3 futures Daniel had no right to touch. They pushed open the courtroom doors. Daniel was already there. He sat confidently at his table, suit perfectly pressed, hair styled like he had spent hours preparing. Vanessa wasn't by his side, but her absence didn't soften him. He leaned back in his chair with a faint smirk, tapping a pen against the table. To him, this was already won. Margaret sat behind him, lips tight with satisfaction, as if this was the moment she had been waiting for ever since Emily entered their family. When Daniel finally noticed Emily walking in, his expression didn't shift, not even a twitch. He looked at her like she was a nuisance, an unfinished task on his schedule. His lawyer stood, approaching Emily and Evan with a polite but condescending smile. "Glad you finally showed. My client was beginning to think you lost your nerve." Evan didn't blink. "She doesn't lose anything." Emily took her seat, ignoring the snide glances from Daniel's side. She kept her hands folded in her lap, steady even as her heart thudded hard inside her chest. Daniel leaned slightly toward her, pretending concern. "Emily, you could have just talked to me. You didn't have to drag this into court. We could have settled things quietly." She didn't look at him. "We're exactly where we need to be." He scoffed. "You shouldn't make this harder on yourself." Sit down, Evan said coldly, without even glancing at Daniel. Daniel's smirk twitched for a second, but he sat. When the judge walked in, everyone rose. Emily inhaled slowly. This was it. The judge took his seat. This is the matter of Daniel Carter versus Emily Parker regarding marital abandonment and financial control. Let's begin. Daniel's lawyer stood smoothly. Your Honor, my client is simply seeking fair access to marital assets. Mrs. Parker left without communication, creating instability in their shared life and financial obligations. Evan rose. Your Honor, everything Mr. Carter just said is inaccurate, and we intend to prove that with full transparency. Daniel's lawyer lifted a hand dramatically. Before we proceed, we request mandatory disclosures from Mrs. Parker. Full disclosures, financial, medical, and personal status relevant to the marriage. Daniel glanced at Emily with a smug, victorious look, like he finally had her cornered. He still thought she was broke, was weak, still thought she had nothing left. Evan stepped forward calmly. Your Honor, we have no objection to disclosures. The judge nodded. Proceed. Emily felt the air shift around the courtroom. Margaret leaned forward in her seat. Daniel's shoulders lifted, expecting a clean win. Evan's voice cut through the silence. We respectfully request permission to reveal all disclosures at once, in full, for clarity and context. The judge frowned lightly. All disclosures? At the same time? Yes, Your Honor, Evan said. My client's situation requires complete transparency. Piecemeal information would misrepresent the truth. Daniel's lawyer stepped forward. We don't object. Of course he didn't. Daniel was confident, too confident. He thought Emily had nothing to reveal, nothing worth hearing. The judge nodded. Permission granted. Mrs. Parker, please stand. Emily rose slowly, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment, the weight of what was coming. The courtroom, every whisper died. Daniel, Aline expected Russell forward, in a confession of weakness, but Emily stood tall, steady, calm. Evan placed a gentle hand at her back and whispered, Whenever you're ready. She nodded. She opened her mouth. Emily took one slow breath, then another, steadying herself as the courtroom watched her. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. She lifted her chin just enough to show she was done being afraid. I am pregnant. The room erupted. A wave of gas swept across the benches. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's eyes widened, his forehead creasing in disbelief. What? He whispered. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order! The noise simmered into a buzzing silence. Emily continued, her voice clear. I am pregnant. With your children, Daniel. Eyes fell silent, stilled, sharp. Apology. Breakdown. Daniel stood halfway from his chair, face pale. Emily, what do you mean? That's not... When? How? She didn't look at him. She stayed focused on the judge, her expression calm. I am carrying triplets. The courtroom exploded again. 3. Not 3. Triplets. Daniel stumbled back into his chair like someone had pulled the strength out of his legs. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. Vanessa, sitting stiffly in the back row, went rigid, her lips tightening into a thin, nervous line. Emily stood there silently as the judge banged the gavel again. Order in this courtroom! When quiet finally returned, Emily slowly sat, and Evan stepped forward, removing a document from his briefcase. Your Honor, Evan said, we are not finished. Daniel swallowed hard. What else is there? Evan glanced at him with a sharp, cold smile. The truth. He handed the first document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. This is a medical file belonging to Miss Vanessa Hale. Daniel turned toward Vanessa, confusion twisting across his face. Vanessa? What is that? Vanessa froze, her eyes darting to the door as though calculating how fast she could run. 1. 2. Evan continued, voice steady but unforgiving. It states that Ms. Hale is medically incapable of carrying children. She has known this for years. The court gasped again. Daniel whipped around to face Vanessa. You? What? You said you wanted a family. You told me. She panicked and stood abruptly. Daniel, I can explain. You lied to me? He shouted, voice cracking. You knew I wanted a child. Vanessa shook her head. It wasn't like that. Oh, it was exactly like that, Evan said calmly, holding up another set of documents. She targeted you for status, and Margaret Carter helped her. Margaret jerked as though struck, eyes widening in alarm. Evan handed the second document to the judge. This contains evidence that Margaret promised Vanessa social influence and financial connections if she succeeded in pushing Emily out of Daniel's life. Margaret jumped to her feet. That is a lie. It's in writing, Evan replied simply. The judge lifted the pages, examining the signatures, the emails, the dates. All real. Vanessa's face drained of color. She clutched her purse and bolted down the aisle, heels clacking as she rushed out of the courtroom. Daniel stared after her, shattered. Vanessa! Vanessa! Come back! She didn't. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time since Emily had known him, Daniel looked genuinely lost. But the nightmare wasn't over for him. Not yet. Evan reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a thick folder. And now, Your Honor, for the financial disclosure. Daniel forced a shaky breath, trying to sit upright. Whatever she thinks she's hiding, it doesn't matter. She walked out with nothing. She always had nothing. Evan laid the document flat on the judge's bench. This, he said, is the contract Emily Parker secured for $300 million, signed under her maiden name, fully executed, fully protected. Daniel's jaw dropped. What contract? His voice was barely audible. Evan continued. Her company has been valued at over $500 million, and she owns all of it, separately, legally, untouchable. Daniel stared at Emily, horror filling his face. You're lying. Emily finally looked at him. Her voice was steady and low. You told me I had nothing to offer. He shook his head slowly. Emily, no, this isn't. I didn't know. You didn't tell me. You never asked, she said. You never even looked. Daniel sank into his chair, head falling into his hands. The judge spoke sternly. Mr. Carter, your petition for financial control is denied. Your attempts to seize your ex-wife's assets are coercive and without basis. You will not pursue her again in this matter. Daniel didn't look up. The judge continued. Additionally, your behavior suggests manipulation and disregard for legal boundaries. I strongly advise you to seek counsel before making any further claims. Margaret stared forward, cheeks flushed with humiliation. Her son's downfall was now public, irrefutable, complete. Emily rose, gathering her things calmly. Daniel stood suddenly. Emily, please, wait. She looked at him, eyes soft but final. You walked away from me, she said quietly, and now I'm doing the same. She turned toward the door. Her steps were steady. She didn't look back. Months later, she lay in a hospital bed, cradling 3 tiny newborns against her chest, their skin warm, their breaths soft, their lives untouched by the storm that brought them here. A nurse slipped a manila envelope onto the bedside table. A delivery came for you, Ms. Parker. Emily opened it slowly, the investigator's final report. Inside were pages she hadn't seen yet. Messages, notes, proof that everything Daniel had done to her was orchestrated. Not by him, by Margaret, by Vanessa, by people who underestimated her strength. She closed the folder carefully. She looked down at her babies, their eyes still closed, their small hands curling against her. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to fight anymore. Her life, her children, were her answer. People reveal who they are when they think you're powerless. Daniel revealed Margaret. Vanessa revealed herself, and she rose anyway. Revealed himself. Herself. Emily?